Hi everyone, my name is Bill Myers and I'm a Philadelphia author and lawyer. And this show is called Sword and Pen because I interview other authors and other lawyers. We're taping this show on the anniversary of 9/11, and I think that's appropriate because my guest today, Brad Borkan, wrote a book on extreme decision making. And a lot of extreme decision making took place on 9/11. So welcome, Brad. How are you doing?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me, Bill.
So tell us where you were born. You were born locally and raised here?
That's right. I was born in Princeton, New Jersey, and I went to Princeton High School and went to Penn.
You studied the decision-making sciences.
Decision sciences.
What is that?
So it's a study of how people make decisions, both the psychology of making decisions, also how businesses should make decisions, and how businesses use computers to make decisions.
And I know that you're interested in extreme decision making. What is that, and how did you get interested in that?
So extreme decision making is decision making under really extreme adversity. And extreme adversity being whether it's on top of Everest, whether it's in Antarctica in the early 1900s, whether it's 9/11, police and firemen and emergency rescue teams going in, whether it's people just in survival situations, any type of situation where decision making is under extreme circumstances.
And how did you get interested in the Antarctic explorers?
So the Antarctic explorers was interesting. My mother worked at the Princeton Public Library, and every day after school I'd go to this library and pick out books to read and find everything was boring me until I picked up a book about Antarctic exploration.
And Shackleton's Valiant Voyage.
That's right.
I read the same book when I was a boy.
And exactly. And just a book that just resonated with me. It's like, wow, these guys, they're heroism, bravery, surviving against all odds and achieving great things. And it just stuck with me for my life. And now I live in London. I live in England, and I've lived there for the last 25 years. And where a lot of the early Antarctic expeditions happened, came out of the UK, or came out of Norway, so it's all European based, and now living like in the midst of all that. So I've been going to Antarctic conferences and getting involved with the Antarctic community.
So we have Shackleton, we have Amundsen, and we have Scott.
Right.
And they were all polar and Antarctic explorers.
Exactly.
Tell me about these men. What were some of their characteristics? What were they like?
Well, they were all strong leaders, but everything done in Antarctica was done with teams. And so at one level, they were all very good at picking great teams, because their teams were very multidisciplinary in a way that right now we'd call that diversity. But they're all white males. So they didn't have diversity by gender. They didn't have diversity by ethnicity, but they had people from many different countries. They had people they had scientists, they had naval people, they had other people who were associated with the expeditions for various reasons, cooks and various people like that. And so they had people from different age ranges, people from like 18 to 20 years old to people who were 30, 40 years old, some with Antarctic experience, some not. But they're very diverse teams, and I think they were one of the things that not only did these men lead from the front, they were very good at team building, really exceptional at team building.
Okay, let's talk about Amundsen versus Scott. Okay, they both wanted to be the first men to make it to the South Pole. Okay. Amundsen made it and survived. Scott made it, but died on the way back.
Yes.
What's the current thinking about that? I mean, why did Amundsen prevail and survive? Why did Scott perish?
It's very interesting, and there's been books written that have really have made Scott look very bad. There's a sense of he was incompetent, he wasn't a strong leader, he was temperamental, compared to Amundsen. And Amundsen was very organized. He led a very small team. They were he hired. Had the very best best Norwegian skier, was probably the best skier in the world at that point in time. In the early 1900s, he had great dog sled drivers, experienced men who could go with him. But But nowadays, the tide has turned towards Scott more, and the sense of saying Scott wasn't so incompetent. There were some writers who wanted to portray Scott as being incompetent to boost Amundsen's stature. But the reality was Scott had a lot of strengths as well, and he was an exceptional scientist and led us an exceptional scientific exploration and team.
And Scott, his scientific findings are a bigger legacy than Amundsen's just having been the first guy there.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. Scott's, even today when studying climate change in Antarctica, people are referring back to Scott's work. So they have a control of saying, okay, this is where you know what Antarctica is like today, 2018. What was it like in 1912, 1911? Let's look at the core samples they were pulling out. Let's look at the science they were doing in that region. And it's just fascinating.
Let's talk about Shackleton for a minute. Shackleton's boat broke up in the ice. Tell us about some of the leadership decisions that he had to make, getting back and getting his men back.
Okay, that is actually one of the great survival stories of all time, and one of the most remarkable stories of all time is and one of the ones I like telling when I do talks to business groups, to other groups. It's a story that resonates, that people can really relate to, in the sense that Shackleton had the goal. Once Scott had perished on the way back, as you said, Amundsen got into the pole first, Scott perished on the way back. Amundsen, still a young man, still had Antarctic dreams, was saying, I know, I'll do something different. I'm going to take a team of men and walk across continental Antarctica. And the goal was, the approach was to sail 2 ships down, one from one side down towards the Weddell Sea, and the other was to sail a ship down towards Ross Island, which is a small island off Antarctica, and from the New Zealand side. And basically the team from the New Zealand side would lay depots of food and supplies for the men coming across Antarctica. Once they passed the South Pole, then they'd pick up the food and supplies left for them by the other team. The interesting thing was there's no communication at all between these teams. Right. There's no communication as we say in the book, no communication as far as you can shout. They had no telephone equipment, no radio equipment. They had nothing that could alert the other team to what would happen, what was happening with the other situation. And and Shackleton, they sailed their boat down into the Weddell Sea, and the Weddell Sea was chock full of ice. And eventually the boat got stuck in the ice, and it stayed stuck in the ice for months and months and months, and eventually the ice just crushed it to smithereens.
And so what were the challenges he had to face?
So he was there, he had 27 other men, so 28 men in total, no hope of rescue. Nobody knew they were there. Nobody knew they were in this predicament. They had 3 lifeboats, and they had to decide, how are we going to get ourselves out of this? And basically, it was very interesting because his primary goal was, let's walk across continental Antarctica. As soon as the ship was crushed, he goes, okay, men, we have a new goal. Our goal is to get home, everyone home safely.
Okay, so you switch from let's be the first to I want to bring all my men home, a higher goal, a higher purpose.
Exactly.
In your readings, how important is it to survival and to success under extreme circumstances that the people be pursuing a higher goal rather than just, it's all about me?
Right. Absolutely. The higher purpose, and this relates as much to 9/11 as it does to people in Everest, to people in the airless Everest climbers, to people in Antarctica, is having a higher purpose gave them something greater. It was more than just saying, I'm going to plant a flag somewhere. It was about saying, I'm doing this for science. I'm doing this for the advancement of human knowledge. Or in 9/11, I'm doing this to save human lives. That higher purpose can propel people with greater strength, gives them greater mental attitude, gives them greater physical strength that comes from that mental attitude.
And I know you did some reading about 9/11 in preparation for the interview. What are some of the lessons, some of the points that you learned from the Antarctic explorations that you found to be kind of common themes with what happened with the heroes for 9/11?
Right. It was interesting because when I first started this, I thought there's no similarity whatsoever. I mean, the police. What's really would the relationship be between police and fire and emergency rescue teams going into burning buildings, and that of Antarctic explorers? And the more I read, and the more videos I watched, interviews with survivors, and was they worked very well in teams. And everything done in Antarctica was done in teams. Everything, in many cases, the firefighters, the police, they worked in teams, and they worked very well in teams. And also leaders led from the front. I mean, just like Shackleton and Scott, they were right there in the front lines with their men. Same with Amundsen. They weren't like generals in a war saying, "You guys go out." You know, the firefighters, the heads of all the fire departments in New York City, they were right there in the burning buildings with everybody else. And
physical courage, great physical courage.
Incredible courage, incredible bravery. And also, teams were fluid. They were able to make decisions as needed, just like, and obviously in 9/11, conditions were changing rapidly, minute by minute by minute. And teams needed to be like, okay, you know, how are they going to cope? How are they going to make decisions in that time frame? Same in Antarctica. Someone falls in a crash. All of a sudden, decision-making changes. Someone, you know, if other situations the weather could change in an instant. All of a sudden, you could find yourself in the middle of a blizzard almost instantly. And how they coped and how they worked as teams.
Quick decision-making. I know when you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier,
right.
You talked to me about the importance of the ability to make quick decisions. Right. Under extreme circumstances. And you know, you just told me about that in Antarctica, obviously in 9/11. I mean, the time frame was so compressed in 9/11, what those men and women faced, they had almost no time to make decisions. If we step back for a minute and we talk about corporate America, because I know you work for SAP,
right.
which is one of the biggest and most innovative companies in the world. For a big corporation nowadays, how important is it to be able to make quick decisions?
It's very important. And I think one of the things that's interesting is there's so much opportunity for us to make slow decisions because we're seeking a perfect decision in business. And so you've got the internet, you've got all the analysis you can do, you've got all these wonderful analytical tools, and you can say, I'm going to make a perfect decision. And part of what our book does also is not just looks at business decision making or the relevance to Antarctic decision making to business decision making, but to personal decision making. And same with personal decisions, whether we're buying a house, a car, finding a person to date, whatever we're seeking, I can find the perfect person, I can find the perfect house, I can find the perfect car. And the reality is we can overwhelm ourselves with analysis. And what was interesting in as you said, 9/11, it was 102 minutes from the time the first plane hit to the time the second building collapsed. And so
that's all it was.
That's all it was.
minutes?
102 minutes between two planes hit and two buildings collapsed, and so very fast decision making. Same in Antarctica. Expeditions lasted over years, but there were times when decisions had to be made very, very quickly. The key is making decisions quickly and having the ability to recover from bad decisions quickly as well.
Okay. Let's talk about leadership strength. Now, I know Amundsen, Scott, Shackleton, very strong personalities. In their crews, how much room was there for dissent?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. You get an interesting situation because they didn't really want dissent. They at times took advice, and they always had a second in command, and they would take advice from their second in command. But across the general men of the expedition, they might take advice in certain situations, but there was a very poignant case in Shackleton's situation. Once the boat had been crushed, they had the 3 lifeboats. They were in a situation where they were actually dragging the lifeboats across the ice to try to they're on a big ice floe, and trying to get the boats to open water. And they couldn't. The challenge with being on an ice floe is as ice floes drift northwards,
right.
They start to melt. They start to break up. You don't want to be on an ice floe that's breaking up. You'd rather be in a boat. And so at the stage where they needed to be in the boats, they were saying, well, we need to drag these boats. And so they're dragging one of the boats across the ice. And McNish, who's the carpenter, who had done a lot of repairs to the lifeboats to make them more seaworthy, was realizing the boats were getting damaged. And he piped up and said, and criticized Shackleton for this in front of all the men. Okay.
Was that important, the fact that he did it in front of all the men?
In front of all the men. And he was trying to say, we're going to die, this is ridiculous, you're destroying the boats. And no one's going to come rescue us, and all was doomed. And Shackleton felt it was a mutiny. And one of the other men started echoing back what McNish was saying, and Shackleton was like, I got to stop this now. And within 10 or 20 minutes, Shackleton and his second in command, Frank Wild, basically threatened McNish's life and said, Shackleton was like, I'm still the captain of the ship. McNish was like, there's no ship, it's been crushed in the ice. He goes, that doesn't matter. I'm still the captain of the expedition. You're all going to get paid when we survive. It's still an expedition, it's still a ship, even if it's not a physical ship, and we'll go get you all back safely. And
he punished McNish for that, didn't he?
Absolutely. He wrote in his diary, Shackleton wrote in his diary, he would never forgive McNish, ever, for for that. And he denied McNish, when the officer did survive, he denied McNish this polar medal as a real slap in the face for.
And was it Amundsen or Scott who had to turn back at one point, and his number two told him, we got to turn back. He finally did turn back, and it saved everybody's life, but when he turned back, he then kicked the man off the team.
Yes, that's right. And so he had, Amundsen's second in command was slightly different because there was a very famous Norwegian explorer named Nansen, who had since retired from exploring, and Johansen was Nansen's second in command, and he and Nansen, who worked closely with Amundsen and gave Nansen gave Amundsen his ship, which was called the Fram, which was one of the great polar ships of all time, the greatest polar ship of all time, and he insisted that he take Johansen. So it wasn't quite. It wasn't Amundsen's first choice for his second in command, but he was stuck with this and with this man, and Johansen had tons of Arctic experience and tremendous experience, and knew they were in danger. That Amundsen had set out too early. They set out too early. It was too cold, and they will perish if they didn't turn around and head back to their base camp.
And Amundsen finally listened to him and did turn back.
And they did turn back, and they did all survive.
But he punished him by not letting him come along.
That's right. Yeah.
So a takeaway would be, if you're in an extreme situation, and you're a number two, and you want to speak truth to authority, truth to power, you may pay a price for it, and you have to be willing to pay that price for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. But also, it's how you talk to someone, how you convey. McNish, who was the carpenter, who was seeing the boats getting destroyed, had he pulled Shackleton to one side and said, and explained the situation, it might have been a very different outcome. But they're trying to create a resurrection, insurrection around that.
Right.
That was the wrong approach.
Okay, so if I'm a C-suite executive, I'm a CIO, a CFO, CMO, and I see that my CEO is about to take us all down, the thing for me to do isn't to get on a megaphone and call him out on it. It's meet him privately?
It's private, quiet conversation on the side.
Okay.
In the right word and using the right words. It's all about language. It's all about conveying the feeling and backing it up with facts.
Okay. Let's talk about the role of heroism in an extreme environment and making decisions in an extreme environment. How important is it to have people who have kind of, and this is a very, very American point of view, because we all see ourselves as potential Captain Kirks. How important is it to have on your team people who have that certain something inside that when the chips are down, they're going to step up to the plate and maybe risk everything? How important is that?
So that's quite critical, and but it's about doing that within a team framework. And I think this is it's not always about individual heroism. It's about heroism in a win-win environment, because it's about, you've got to be able to carry the weaker people with you. In these extreme situations where there are always stronger men and weaker men, and being able to figure out how do you keep the weaker men moving along without diminishing the group, how to make people not become bullies over the weaker men, and things like those are very key skills. And but at times people did have to be heroes. I mean, there's one of the Antarctic men was named Tom Crean, and in numerous different situations, he was undoubtedly a big hero, and he had and one of the themes that we have in the book is that sometimes for a team to be successful, I believe this is true in business as well. Sometimes for a team to be successful, you have to let one person be the hero.
Okay.
But so long as the other team members step back and go, yes, we agree that one person is going to have to step forward and do something heroic, and we're going to let him, as opposed to fight him or.
Right. Now I know in the Antarctic situations there were a number of instances where a man would get injured, he'd be slowing the team down, and a decision had to be made. Do we carry him as best we can and maybe we all perish because of it? Or do we leave him behind and maximize the team's chances of survival?
Right. Well, that's one of the story we open the book with, actually. It's a wonderful set of 5 or 6 paragraphs. A remarkable story of these 3 men on the ice. They've been going out 750 miles man-hauling, so pulling, that means basically pulling sledges. They're wearing harnesses, they're pulling sledges, so they're not using dogs or ponies, or they're basically pulling these very heavy sledges, and they've gone out 750 miles, and they're on the way back, and there are 3 of them, and as there are almost 200 miles to go to get back to base camp, there's no hope of rescue, nobody's going to come out and get them, and one of the men comes down with scurvy. Okay. And scurvy, the telltale signs of scurvy are blackening of gums, weakening of the joints, the discoloration of the skin. It's very, they all knew, no one knew why people got scurvy, but they understood what this, they could tell the symptoms right away, and it's good to be deadly. They continue on to the point, he's getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and they have to put him on the sledge. As they continue on, they've got the 3rd man on top of the sledge. Okay. So it's, they're slower and slower, going slower and slower, and at one point the man who's dying of scurvy says, stop. It's like, leave me behind in my sleeping bag, and you guys continue on. They only have 1 tent. You're not going to survive in Antarctica without a tent. He goes, you two, even though we've been on starvation rations for two weeks, we're all going to perish out here if we get the rate we're going. You leave me behind. And did they? Well, this is the interesting question, because the story's slightly more complicated than that, because he was their commanding officer. Oh, okay. And when they hesitate, because he says, leave me behind, and they're like, and as they hesitate, he says, I'm your commanding officer, I'm giving you a military order. To disobey this order is mutiny. See, now in Hollywood, they'd all say, we're not obeying, and they'd carry him forward, and they'd all survive. What happened there? Did they leave him behind? Did they follow the order? No. They said, we're masters of our fate today. We're going to stay with him. Wow. And they stayed with him, and they carried him on the sledge for another point till they got to within 35 miles of base camp. And at that point, he was just so weak, he was so near death, and they had so little food that they came to a conclusion that of the 2 men who were still strong enough, one of them would walk that 35 miles to go from, and all he was going to carry with him, no sleeping bag, he had 3 biscuits and 2 sticks of chocolate. And he was going to make it or he was going to die. And walking in deep snow. What happened? What happened? Did he make it or did he die? He made it. He made it? It took 16 hours. Had he stopped, he stopped to rest for much longer than he did. He stopped periodically and had a little bit of the crackers and things like that. He put one of the crackers in his back pocket. And but he continued on. And when he stopped to eat the chocolate, he said it broke into powder to the point where there's no nutritional value whatsoever. So frozen, and he got to the hut where there were men, and just as he got there, a blizzard descended, and it took another day and a half for the blizzards to subside before they could go rescue. But did they rescue? Everyone was rescued. Everyone survived. Okay. It's just remarkable. And one of the, just to wrap up that story, because a funny little side bit to that story, is when the men were talking to him. They said, well, why'd you put the biscuit in your back pocket? Okay. He said, I was saving it for an emergency. Okay. So we're almost out of time. Okay. Space is our next area of exploration.
If you can give us a soundbite, one or two very important things that have to do with leadership, survival in that kind of environment. If you were standing in front of a classroom full of future Captain Kirks and Mr. Spocks, and you could only say one thing to them, what would it be?
It would be about teamwork, absolutely. They've got to work consistently as a team and always look out for the best possible outcome as a team, and it's not about individual heroism. It's not about the meat. You don't, in the Antarctic explorers, what you find, the reason they survived so well, and even in multi-year expeditions in the most extreme circumstances with lack of food, frostbite, all the different challenges that they faced and still achieved greatness, they did it through teamwork.
So not me, we.
It wasn't about, yes, exactly. It wasn't about the individual itself, person's glory. It was about the team succeeding in great ways.
Brad, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Brad's book is When Your Life Depends Upon It, and it's about extreme decision making. Thank you, everyone.